Hello, this is David Airdrie talking to you again from the ISTH 2025 in Washington, D.C. Today we have two guests with us, Dr. Gregoire Legal and Dr. Vicky May, who are going to discuss some presentations by Dr. May at the ISTH. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gregoire Legal. I'm a thrombosis doctor in Ottawa, and I had the privilege to supervise Vicky during her PhD in Ottawa, and I was particularly happy to see her present on two projects that she started during her stay in Ottawa. So one of them, Vicky, was about the trying to establish a specific diagnostic algorithm for PE diagnosis in patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so diagnosing PE in patients with COPD exacerbation is quite challenging, and the prevalence of PE varies between 11 to 17% in this population. So to help clinicians better manage the diagnostic in these patients, we're thinking about looking at predictors of PE diagnosis in patients with COPD exacerbation, and also, if possible, derive and validate a specific COPD PE diagnostic strategy.
Yeah, so you came up with a new, well, at first you were trying maybe to work on a score, and then you thought, well, better integrate it with the other tests that we typically use for PE diagnosis, right? So can you tell us a bit more about the predictors that you ended finding, and how do you use them in practice then?
So we ended up with a COPD-specific score of 3 items, which included signs or symptoms of DVT, P is the most likely diagnosis, and non-prevalent COPD exacerbation. And so we didn't want only to propose a prediction score, but really a diagnostic strategy. So we included D-dimer in our PE diagnostic strategy with our COPD-specific score of 3 items. We also combine it with D-dimer with 2 cutoffs of 1,000 and 500, depending on the number of items that the patient had.
Yeah, what I find particularly interesting is how you came up with the fact of that non-prevalent exacerbation of COPD has been negatively associated with the diagnosis of PE, right? And that's something that maybe was known a bit, but I know you worked on a systematic review to establish that and then going on to include it, right?
Yes, correct. We did work on a systematic review looking at the association between the prevalence of the COPD exacerbation and the presence of PE. And we saw that the prevalence of PE was higher in patients who had non-prevalent COPD exacerbation. So in our PE diagnostic strategy, we were able to include a variable that was more specific to patients with COPD on top of known risk factors in the general population.
Very cool. And then, so I guess the discussion was very interesting as well, right? One of the comments you got was about the fact that your validation data set was not perfect. Well, not perfect in 2 ways, right? A, because the score didn't validate too well, but as you pointed out as well, the population wasn't the best, right? But then, do you have any other venues, or how are you going to proceed now?
That's a great question. So yes, we do have some ideas is to look at the safety of this PE diagnostic strategy, but prospectively, but also to look at other predictors of PE in patients with COPD exacerbation. So we might not have captured all predictors in this population. So doing that will possibly help improve our PE diagnostic strategy for patients with COPD exacerbation.
Very good. And then I like the point, well, it was quite funny to hear that some people were seeing the glass half empty, right? Saying, well, your algorithm would still lead to 50% of patients requiring a CT, while in fact, the reality is that now we just don't know what to do, right? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, it was a very interesting point. And it's also to point out that in the general population, when we use our clinical diagnostic rules that are currently available, such as the Wells or the revised Geneva score combined with a fixed D-dimer cutoff of 500, approximately 50%, 55% of the patient would need imaging to rule out PE. So that's pretty much similar with what our algorithm shows.
Yes, and then remains to be shown what is a suspected PE in COPD patients, right? I guess that's what the question was revolving around. Very good. And I saw that you had another presentation as well, and that was about the predictor study, right? And you were looking at patterns of presentation and looking at whether patients who had an event before were more likely to come back with the same type of symptoms, same type of. So can you tell us a bit more about that project as well?
Yes, it was a very interesting project. It had the Our goal was to help improve the diagnostic investigations in patients who had a prior history of VTE. And what we saw in this study was that in patients who had a prior DVT as their last VTE, presented more frequently with lower extremity symptoms as at their suspicion of recurrent VTE, and were also diagnosed more frequently with a recurrent DVT. Same with patients with PE, so they presented more frequently with respiratory symptoms at the suspicion of the recurrent VTE, and were diagnosed also more frequently with a PE.
And so we knew already, right, that patients who had a DVT were more likely to present with a new DVT, those with PE, with a new PE, although maybe a bit less. It sounds that it's more pronounced for patients with DVT. So can you tell us again what your study specifically adds and on as compared with what we already knew?
Yes, our study is actually, to our knowledge, the first one to report on the symptoms of the presentation when patients come back with a suspicion of recurrent VTE. So it has the potential, our study, to help clinicians improve their diagnostic management, and not only saying that when they come back, for example, with patients who had a prior DVT, when they come back with lower extremity symptoms, that it's only post-thrombotic syndrome, for example, that their rate of recurrence is actually quite high, and we need to think about it, and probably it will help the clinician investigate and request for Doppler ultrasound more.
Yeah, to me, that was a big take home, right? That we often feel that, oh, yeah, they're worried. That's why they come back. They have the same symptoms. But as you showed, in fact, they do have a quite high proportion of confirmed VTE, right? So I think, yes, that's a fair point that we shouldn't ignore this type of symptoms. Thank you very much. Have a good meeting.
Thank you both for taking the time to do the interview. We really appreciate it. And this is David Airdrie thanking our listeners for listening to Clot Conversations from Thrombosis Canada at the ISTH 2025. And don't forget to check out our website for the resources and tools. As well, the notes of the episode will include links to the relevant information. Have a good day.